Every few months now, another name quietly disappears from the sport. A competitor in his 30s, gone without warning. A rising amateur with 500,000 followers, found dead in his apartment. A coach who was, by every outward measure, in the best condition of his life, collapsing in a way no one saw coming. Bodybuilding forums light up for a week, tribute posts circulate, and then the cycle resets and waits for the next name. Each time it happens, the same man keeps getting asked the same question. How did the sport get here? That man is Dorian Yates, six-time Mr. Olympia, the bodybuilder credited more than anyone else with inventing the modern mass monster physique that dominates the sport today. At 64 years old, he is not staying quiet about what he sees happening to the world he helped create. For most of his life, Yates avoided this conversation entirely. He built his legend on silence, training alone, behind closed doors in a windowless, low-lit gym in Birmingham, England, that competitors and journalists alike described as something closer to a dungeon than a gym. He skipped the exhibitions other champions relied on. He rarely gave interviews, and when he did, he gave away almost nothing. He let the physique argue his case for him, round after round, Olympia after Olympia. In recent years, that changed. He started talking about his own body, in detail he had not shared before, about what winning actually cost him physically, and about a generation of young lifters he says he can no longer reach, no matter how directly he tries to warn them. This is not a story about an old champion favoring a simpler, more disciplined era. It is the story of a man watching history repeat itself, at a speed and scale he did not anticipate, and trying later than he might have liked, to slow it down before it affects more people who remind him of who he used to be. To understand why his warning carries the weight it does, it helps to understand what he did to his own body, to reach the top. Yates was not speculating about the risks he now describes. He did not read about them in a study or hear about them secondhand. He experienced them directly on his own frame. Between 1992 and 1997, Dorian Yates won 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles, an achievement that still ranks among the most dominant runs in the sport's history. Before he arrived, bodybuilding had rewarded a specific aesthetic: symmetry, flow, proportion, the kind of classical sculptural look that Arnold Schwarzenegger had turned into a global icon. A generation earlier, judges valued balance, a physique that resembled, in some idealized sense, a work of art. Yates departed from that framework entirely. He walked on stage bigger, denser, and more dryly conditioned than anything judges had seen up to that point. And he did it largely without the touring, promotion, or showmanship other champions used to build their reputations. He let the physique speak for itself, and the sport changed direction because of it. Ronnie Coleman came next, taking the size-focused template Yates had pioneered and extending it further. And by the 2000s, the mass monster era that Yates had started had become the sport's new baseline. Bigger was no longer simply impressive, it was expected. Every competitor who followed was in some sense measured against the standard he set. Almost nobody watching those Olympia victories from the crowd, or from a grainy VHS tape at home, knew what was actually happening behind the scenes to make them possible. 6 weeks before his final Olympia title defense in 1997, Yates experienced what he now describes without hesitation as a life-threatening health scare. He started coughing up blood, a genuinely terrifying symptom for anyone, let alone someone 6 weeks from defending the biggest title in his sport. He needed a blood transfusion and an additional procedure to seal off the source of the bleeding. When his doctor asked him what he had been taking, Yates listed steroids, growth hormone, an anti-estrogen compound to control side effects, and an anti-inflammatory medication his doctor had originally prescribed for a nagging shoulder injury. That last one turned out to be the cause. The anti-inflammatory was known to be hard on the stomach lining, and it was never meant to be used for longer than roughly 6 weeks at a stretch. Yates had been taking it continuously for 2 years. His doctor's reaction, by his account, said everything that needed to be said. Meanwhile, years of accumulated strain on his kidneys and liver had already been building the entire time, invisible to the cameras, invisible to the fans in the arena, invisible to everyone except him and the small circle of people actually treating him. He still went on stage, he still won that Olympia, his 6th and final one. Then, not long after, he retired from competition entirely. It was only once the pressure of chasing another title lifted that he started speaking about what it had actually taken to get there, the toll hidden underneath 6 consecutive gold trophies. Yates has addressed why none of this registered as a warning sign at the time, and why he kept pushing through symptoms that severe. He has said that early in his career, someone told him plainly that what he was doing carried real health risks, that he could develop serious problems down the line, or even die from it. His response, in his own words, was that he simply didn't care. At 25, he says, "You're convinced nothing can touch you. You want to be the best in the world, and the kind of risk calculation that matters to a 45-year-old doesn't yet exist in a 25-year-old's head." He has compared it to reckless driving in your 20s, noting that nearly everyone does something dangerous at that age, because nearly everyone at that age is convinced they're the exception to whatever rule applies to everyone else. He argues that this mindset isn't a personal flaw unique to him. It's built into the structure of competitive bodybuilding itself. The sport by its nature doesn't reward caution. It rewards whoever is willing to go furthest, fastest, with the least regard for tomorrow. And there will always be another 25-year-old willing to go further than the person standing in front of him offering a warning. Yates has also stated what he believes is fundamentally different about today's landscape, and why he considers it more dangerous now than at the height of his own career, when he was arguably pushing his body further than anyone alive at the time. When Yates was competing, he says the drug protocols he and his peers used were by today's standards almost restrained by comparison. He has given specific concrete figures when discussing this publicly, describing his use of trenbolone in the form known as parabolan at roughly 2 ampules a week, occasionally 3 at the outer limit, working out to somewhere around 200 milligrams total. He describes even that relatively modest amount by current standards as genuinely toxic, a substance that demanded real respect and caution even from someone chasing the sport's biggest title. He says what he now hears consistently from people still inside the sport is that both current competitors and complete non-competitors alike are routinely taking multiples of what he used at the peak of his career, when he was preparing for the single most demanding, most scrutinized title in professional bodybuilding. That shift is what seems to concern him most. Not that professional athletes keep pushing further than the generation before them, which has in fairness always been true in this sport, but that the entire pool of people taking these risks has expanded far beyond the competitive stage altogether. He describes a shift from what used to be primarily competitive use to what he now calls recreational use, ordinary gym goers with no competition to prepare for, no medical supervision, and no reason to take these substances beyond wanting to look a certain way on social media, taking doses that would have been considered extreme even among elite Olympia competitors 30 years ago. Every generation, he says, pushes what he calls the chemical envelope a little further than the one before it. That much he acknowledges has always been true and will likely continue. But when the people pushing that envelope are no longer elite, closely monitored athletes working under a doctor's supervision, when they are teenagers, college students, and everyday gym goers with no medical oversight and no framework for understanding what they are doing to their own kidneys, liver, and heart, the margin for error narrows considerably. The recent wave of deaths in the bodybuilding community, involving men not much older than Yates was when he won his first Olympia title, is in his account the visible evidence of that narrowing margin. That shift is worth examining closely, because recreational use can sound casual or low stakes. Yates's description suggests otherwise. What he is describing is a population with no competitive deadline shaping their choices, no coach or physician tracking blood work, and no built-in reason to stop or scale back, since there is no stage, no judging panel, and no title to justify eventually tapering off. In competitive bodybuilding, however extreme, there was at least a structure, a season, an off-season, a defined reason to cycle. Without that structure, according to Yates, people remain on these substances indefinitely, pursuing an aesthetic rather than a title, with nothing in the process that signals when to stop. One substance comes up repeatedly when Yates discusses long-term cumulative damage: insulin. It is a hormone with legitimate, life-saving medical applications for people managing diabetes, but bodybuilders have used it off-label for decades because it causes muscle tissue to absorb more nutrients than it otherwise would. Yates has stated on more than one occasion that he considers the danger posed by insulin misuse different in kind from most other substances circulating in the sport. It is not primarily a short-term risk that produces a single dramatic medical event. It is a slow accumulation. He has described the long-term effects of insulin misuse, particularly when combined with other compounds in a person's system, as capable of quietly reducing a person's overall life expectancy, not through one catastrophic event, but through slow cumulative damage that often is not evident until it has already occurred and cannot be reversed. That distinction sets his account apart from the generic "drugs are dangerous" messaging common in fitness media. Yates is not speaking in abstract terms about danger in general. He names specific substances, specific dosages drawn from his own career, and specific physiological mechanisms of harm, all based on what happened in his own body rather than on second-hand accounts. When he discusses elevated kidney and liver enzyme readings, he is describing his own blood work, from his own doctor during his own career. This is not, however, the account of someone categorically opposed to the substances that built his career. Yates draws a careful distinction, and his position is considerably more nuanced than a blanket condemnation of steroids or hormone use. He does not oppose hormone use as a matter of principle. For men over 40 whose natural testosterone has dropped to clinically low levels, he regards medically supervised testosterone replacement therapy as a different situation entirely from competitive or recreational steroid use, not a performance shortcut but a legitimate doctor-supervised medical intervention. He has noted that restoring testosterone to a normal range in someone who is genuinely deficient can improve depression, arthritis symptoms, diabetes risk, and overall cardiovascular health. In that specific context, used properly and under medical supervision to correct a diagnosed deficiency, he sees real benefit rather than harm. The distinction he keeps returning to is about context, dosage, and supervision, not about the substances themselves existing in some kind of moral vacuum. A 55-year-old correcting a genuine diagnosed hormonal deficiency under a doctor's ongoing care represents, in his view, an entirely different situation from a 19-year-old self-administering extreme, unsupervised doses purely to look bigger in a gym mirror or on Instagram. The substances fall into the same broad category in a narrow technical sense, but the real-world risk is completely different. That nuance is what he tries to get people to absorb, and it is a far harder message to deliver than a simple just say no, which may be part of why it does not seem to be landing the way he wants it to. There is also a quieter thread running through what Yates says now, and accounting for genetics that rarely gets discussed openly in these conversations. He has noted that for competitors with strong natural genetics, certain substances can help build an already favorable physique further. For lifters without that genetic ceiling, no amount of chemical assistance changes the outcome in the way they hope. People chasing an Olympia-caliber look who were never going to reach it naturally, he suggests, sometimes escalate their doses because the results are not coming, mistaking the absence of genetic potential for a dosage problem, and pushing their bodies further into dangerous territory, chasing a physique some of them were never built to achieve. This is the part of the story that does not resolve neatly, regardless of how many times Yates tells it. He is not naive about the limits of his own influence, even now, even with his legacy and his platform. He has said essentially that he does not expect to convince most young ambitious athletes to slow down, no matter how clearly or honestly he lays out the risks. He understands the psychology at play, having lived inside it himself for well over a decade at the highest level the sport has seen. He knows from first-hand experience that telling a driven 22-year-old with genuine Olympia dreams that the substances he is taking might shorten his life by years or decades will not outweigh the immediate pull of standing on that stage as the biggest, most dominant competitor in the room. Yates was that same 22-year-old once, chasing the same dream with the same tunnel vision. No one managed to talk him out of anything either, regardless of how many warnings came his way. He continues to speak about it, year after year, interview after interview, revisiting a health scare he survived through a combination of luck and modern medicine, and warning a generation of people who, statistically speaking, are not likely to listen to him. One possible reason is that the alternative, saying nothing and watching the death count continue to climb regardless of whether he speaks up, feels worse to him than the near certainty of being ignored. Another is that even if the overwhelming majority of people tune him out, a small number of young lifters might hear the warning in time to change course, and to him that is worth the effort of speaking up. It may also be simpler than that. A man who spent the better part of 2 decades pushing the limits of what a human body could withstand, now has something to say about what that pursuit costs. And after a long period of silence, he has decided that saying it out loud, even to people who likely will not listen, matters more to him now than staying quiet did. What makes Yates's position difficult to dismiss is that he is not an outsider addressing a sport he never understood from the inside. He is not a doctor who never touched a barbell, or a journalist covering a tragedy after the fact. He is the person who defined what modern bodybuilding looks like, who nearly paid the ultimate price for it at the height of his own success, and who chose, once the pressure of competition was gone, to speak plainly about all of it instead of protecting the legend. That combination, authority earned through direct experience, paired with a willingness to be honest about the cost, is uncommon in a sport built, in many ways, on image and silence. There's an irony underneath all of this that Yates himself seems keenly aware of. The very thing that made him a legend, his willingness to go further than anyone else was willing to go, to treat his own body as raw material for an achievement no one had reached before, is the same instinct he now warns young lifters to resist. He isn't asking them to abandon ambition. He's asking them to separate ambition from recklessness, to understand that the two aren't the same thing, even though at 25 they can feel indistinguishable. That message is difficult to deliver credibly from outside the sport. It's nearly impossible to deliver credibly from inside it, unless the person delivering it paid the price himself, survived it, and lived long enough afterward to sit down and talk about it in plain, unguarded terms. The sport he helped build now buries its young, talented competitors far more often than it used to, and most people inside that world know it, even if they rarely say it out loud. Dorian Yates understands exactly why that's happening, because he came closer to becoming one of those cautionary stories himself than most fans will ever fully realize. What remains uncertain in every interview he gives and every warning he repeats is whether anyone still chasing his legacy today is willing to sit still long enough to hear it.